The cold in the Absorca-Beartooth wilderness did not simply exist. It was a living, predatory thing that sought out the smallest weakness in a man's armor. It found the gap between a glove and a sleeve, the thin line of exposed skin at the collar, the microscopic fractures in an old pair of boots. Elias Thorne sat perfectly still, a statue carved from frost and patience, seemingly impervious to the biting wind that whipped through the canyon. At 60, his circulation wasn't what it used to be, and the titanium pin in his left knee, a souvenir from a lifetime ago in a desert far hotter than this, ached with a dull, rhythmic throb that synchronized with his heartbeat. But Elias didn't move. He barely breathed. To hunt in these mountains, one had to cease being a man and become part of the landscape, as silent as the granite and as unyielding as the pine. He was waiting for an elk. He had been tracking the bull for 2 days, reading the story written in the snow with the literacy of a scholar studying ancient texts. The bull was old, smart, and heavy. Elias had seen the depth of the hoofprints and the drag of the dewclaws. This wasn't a trophy hunt. Elias didn't believe in mounting heads on walls to stroke an ego. The meat would fill his deep freeze for the rest of the winter and spring, a necessary sustenance for a man who lived miles from the nearest paved road. He shifted his weight imperceptibly, his eyes scanning the treeline across the valley floor. The light was flat, the gray sky pressing down on the white earth, robbing the world of shadows and depth. It was the kind of light that played tricks on the eyes, turning stumps into wolves and swaying branches into walking men. Elias checked his rifle, a weathered Winchester Model 70 that had belonged to his father. The walnut stock was scarred, the bluing on the barrel worn to silver in places, but the action was smooth as glass. He ran his thumb over the safety, a subconscious ritual. The silence of the woods was absolute, a heavy blanket that muffled even the sound of his own thoughts. And then the silence broke. It wasn't the snap of a twig or the chuff of an animal. It was a sound that didn't belong here, an alien intrusion that scraped against the natural order of the wilderness. A high-pitched whine, distant but distinct, rising and falling like the buzzing of an angry hornet. Elias frowned, the lines in his weather-beaten face deepening. He lowered his rifle, the spell of the hunt shattered. This area was deep within the federally protected zone. No motors, no snowmobiles, no chainsaws. It was a sanctuary, designated by law and sanctified by the sheer difficulty of the terrain. The sound grew louder, then faded, drifting away on the erratic wind. It was the sound of a two-stroke engine, aggressive and arrogant. He looked at the tracks of the elk he had been following. They headed north, toward the ridge line. The engine noise had come from the east, down in the blind man's gulch. Elias stood up, his knees cracking in protest. The elk would be miles away by now, an animal that old didn't survive by ignoring the sound of machines. The hunt was over, but a different kind of curiosity took root in Elias's gut. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a protective instinct, a territorial bristling that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He adjusted the straps of his pack and turned east. The snow was deeper in the gulch, powdery and treacherous, hiding pockets of air that could swallow a leg up to the hip. Elias moved with a deceptive speed, a sliding, shuffling gait known as the trapper's walk that distributed his weight and conserved energy. As he descended, the pristine nature of the woods began to change. The air, usually crisp with the scent of pine resin and ozone, now carried a faint, oily taint. Unburnt fuel. It hung in the valley like a bad memory. Half a mile down, he found the highway. It wasn't a road of asphalt, but a violent scar cut through the virgin snow. The tracks were wide and deep, the aggressive paddles of high-powered mountain snowmobiles tearing through the delicate crust. There were 3 of them. Elias knelt, pulling off a glove to touch the edge of the track. The snow was still loose, the crystals sharp and unmelted, less than an hour old. He looked at the path they had cut. They weren't riding cautiously. They were tearing through saplings, riding high on the banks, carving lines that spoke of speed and a complete disregard for the terrain. This was joyriding or it was a chase. He followed the tracks. The easy, rhythmic breathing of the hunter was replaced by a tighter, more shallow respiration. His eyes stopped scanning for game and started scanning for threats. He noted the way the tracks wove between the trees, the skill of the riders evident. These weren't tourists who had lost their way from the groomed trails of the ski resort 20 miles south. These riders knew how to handle their machines in deep powder. They were professionals. The valley narrowed, the trees growing thicker, casting long, pale shadows as the afternoon wore on. Elias rounded a bend, maneuvering around a massive boulder, and stopped dead. The smell hit him first. It was heavier than the gasoline. It was the copper-penny tang of blood, hot and rich, steaming into the cold air. In the center of a small clearing, the snow had been churned into a slush of pink and brown. The silence here felt different. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the wild, but the stunned, heavy silence of a graveyard. Lying in the center of the crimson slush was a mound of brown fur. Elias walked forward, his boots crunching loudly in the sudden quiet. He approached the carcass with a heavy heart, a knot of nausea tightening in his stomach. It was a grizzly bear, a boar by the size of the skull, likely 700 pounds in his prime. He should have been deep in hibernation, tucked away in a den high on the slopes. Why was he out? Had they flushed him? As Elias got closer, the full extent of the horror revealed itself. The bear hadn't just been shot. It had been dismantled. The massive paws, armed with claws the length of human fingers, were gone. They had been hacked off at the wrists with something sharp and heavy, likely a machete or a bone saw, leaving ragged stumps of bone and gristle exposing the marrow. Elias circled the body, his breath coming in short, angry huffs. He crouched near the belly. A crude incision had been made, sliced open with surgical precision to extract the gallbladder. The rest of the animal, the hundreds of pounds of meat, the thick, luxurious coat that had kept it warm through winters that would kill a man in hours, was left to rot. Waste? Elias whispered, the word sounding like a curse. Sheer, absolute waste. He had seen poaching before. He had seen teenagers shooting signs or the occasional deer taken out of season by a desperate local needing to feed a family. He didn't like it, but he understood the desperation. This was different. This was greed. This was a commercial operation. Bear paws and gallbladders fetched astronomical prices in the black markets across the ocean. This was organized crime, right here in his backyard, desecrating the cathedral of the wild that he had spent his life worshipping. He stood up, his hand gripping the rifle sling so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked around the clearing. The snowmobile tracks circled the body, a mocking dance of victory, before heading further up the valley, deeper into the forbidden zone. They weren't done. You don't bring 3 sleds and that much fuel for one bear. Elias walked to the edge of the clearing where the tracks exited. He saw something else then, a cigarette butt flicked carelessly into the snow. He picked it up, an expensive brand, filter-tipped. Not the roll-your-owns of the local cowboys. He crushed it in his palm and shoved it into his pocket. The sun was beginning to dip behind the granite peak, casting the valley into a blue twilight. The temperature was plummeting. Any sane man would turn back now. He was 10 miles from his truck, and night in these mountains was a death sentence for the unprepared. He had his emergency bivy sack, a thermos of coffee, and some jerky, but he wasn't geared for a tactical pursuit against superior numbers. But as he looked at the mutilated bear, Elias felt a shift in his soul. It was a cold, hard click, like a round being chambered. He remembered the oath he had taken when he was a young man in uniform, an oath to protect. He remembered the lessons his grandfather had taught him about stewardship, that you only keep what you are willing to defend. He couldn't let them go. If they were heading up the valley, they were moving toward the high basin. And Elias knew what lived in the high basin. He had spent 5 years trying to photograph it, catching only fleeting glimpses of a ghost in the snow. If these butchers found her, the tragedy in this clearing would be just the beginning. Elias checked the load in his rifle. 4 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. He reached into his pack and pulled out his camera, a high-end DSLR with a telephoto lens, checking the battery and the memory card. The camera was his weapon now. The rifle was just for insurance. He took a series of photos of the crime scene. The bear, the severed limbs, the tire treads, the distinct pattern of the tread marks which he recognized as a specific aftermarket brand designed for extreme climbing. He was documenting a murder scene. When he was finished, he slung the camera across his chest, shortening the strap so it sat high and tight against his ribs. He took a sip of water, the liquid shockingly cold against his teeth, and turned his face toward the rising wind. He wasn't hunting elk anymore. The predator had become the protector, and the prey was the most dangerous game of all. He stepped into the tracks of the snowmobiles, matching his stride to the rhythm of their destruction. The wind picked up, howling through the pines, erasing his footprints as soon as he made them. He was a ghost now, a vengeful spirit of the timberline, moving relentlessly into the darkening throat of the mountains. He didn't know how many of them there were or what weapons they carried, but he knew the terrain. He knew where the avalanches waited to be triggered, he knew which ice bridges were rotten, and he knew how to disappear. As the last light of day bled out of the sky, turning the snow to a deep, bruising purple, Elias Thorne disappeared into the tree line, leaving the dead bear behind him as a silent witness to the justice that was coming. The hunt had begun. The darkness did not fall. It rose. It seeped up from the valley floor like black water, filling the hollows and ravines first, then swallowing the tree trunks, and finally extinguishing the last gray light clinging to the peaks of the Absarica Range. For Elias Thorne, the transition from twilight to night was not a hindrance but a change in the rules of engagement. Darkness was the great equalizer. It stripped away the advantage of speed that the snowmobiles possessed and replaced it with the necessity of caution. Machines were loud, and machines needed headlights. Elias needed neither. He moved with the deliberate, agonizing slowness of a glacier. The trail left by the poachers was a highway of churned snow, easy enough to follow even by starlight, but Elias refused to walk in it. To walk in their tracks was to walk into a trap. Instead, he paralleled their route, staying 50 yards up the slope within the dense cover of the lodgepole pines. The snow here was untouched, a powder so deep and light that without his snowshoes, he would have sunk to his waist. With them, he floated, a whisper of weight on the surface, his breath venting through a woolen scarf wrapped tight around his face to mask the plume of vapor that could betray his position. The temperature continued its brutal descent, dropping past 10 degrees below zero. The cold was a physical weight, pressing against his chest, tightening the skin across his cheekbones until it felt like parchment ready to crack. His left knee, the one with the metal pin, had settled into a rhythm of sharp, biting pain that radiated up his thigh with every step. He welcomed the pain. Pain was a signal. Pain meant the nerves were still alive, that the frostbite hadn't yet killed the tissue. It kept him sharp, a constant reminder of his own mortality in a land that offered no mercy. As he climbed, the terrain grew steeper, the gentle slopes of the lower valley giving way to the jagged, granite ribs of the high basin. This was the spine of the continent, a place where the air was thin and metallic. Elias paused, leaning against the rough bark of a pine, waiting for his heart rate to settle. He closed his eyes and listened. The wind was gusting from the north, carrying the scent of ice and ancient stone. But beneath that, faint and intermittent, was the smell he had detected earlier, exhaust fumes. But now, mixed with it, was the distinct, sweet aroma of wood smoke. They had stopped. They had made camp. Elias checked his watch. It was nearly midnight. He had been tracking them for 6 hours, covering miles of vertical terrain that would have broken a younger, fitter man who didn't possess his stubbornness. He took a sip from his canteen, the water slushing with ice crystals, and forced himself to eat a strip of dried venison. His body needed fuel to generate heat. He chewed slowly, his eyes open now, scanning the darkness ahead. A faint glow, like a bruised halo, emanated from behind a ridge half a mile up. Light pollution. In the city, it was a nuisance. Out here, it was a beacon screaming of human intrusion. He adjusted his pack, shifting the weight of the rifle and the camera. He left his snowshoes cached under a deadfall. The terrain ahead was too rocky and dense for them. He would have to post-hole, stepping carefully into the drift, testing the footing before committing his weight. This was the infiltration phase. If they had sentries or if they had motion detectors, a distinct possibility given the sophisticated treads he had seen, this was where he would trigger them. He moved forward, dropping to a crouch. He utilized the shadows of the rocks, moving only when the wind gusted to mask the sound of his movement. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot in his ears. He became hyper-aware of his own gear. The creak of a leather strap, the metallic click of a zipper pull, the rustle of his nylon shell. He silenced them all, adjusting, taping, tightening. He was shedding his humanity, layer by layer, becoming something predatory. It took him another hour to crest the ridge. He crawled the last 50 yards on his stomach, the snow numbing his chin and freezing his beard into a stiff mask. He reached the precipice and looked down into the natural amphitheater of the basin. What he saw made his blood run cold, not from the temperature, but from the sheer audacity of it. It wasn't a camp. It was a forward operating base. Tucked against the sheer face of a cliff, protected from the wind, the poachers had erected a large, dome-shaped tent, likely a military-grade Arctic shelter, glowing warmly from the internal heaters. A stovepipe protruded from the top, venting a steady stream of smoke that was being dispersed by the cliff's updraft. 3 snowmobiles were parked in a precise line, covered with thermal tarps. But it was the equipment on the perimeter that made Elias's grip on his camera tighten. Standing on tripods at the 3 main approaches to the camp were small, black boxes. Infrared sensors. They had created a digital perimeter. If he had walked up the main draw, following the tracks, he would have tripped an alarm miles ago. They were professionals, likely ex-military or high-end contractors. This wasn't local boys looking for thrills. This was a funded, tactical operation. Elias scanned the camp through the telephoto lens of his camera, using the high ISO setting to pierce the gloom. There was a generator running, a quiet Honda unit, humming softly behind a snowbank. A table had been set up outside the tent, bathed in the red light of a tactical lantern to preserve night vision. On the table sat a laptop and a large monitor. 2 men were outside. They were dressed in matching winter camouflage, high-tech Gore-Tex gear that cost more than Elias's truck. They moved with purpose, not the lazy stumbling of drunks. One was cleaning a rifle, a suppressed AR platform chambered in a heavy caliber, likely 308 or 300 blackout. The other was staring at the monitor, adjusting a joystick on a controller. A low buzz, like an oversized mosquito, drifted down from the sky. Elias looked up and saw the blinking green LED of a thermal drone circling the basin. They were scanning the cliffs. They were hunting in the dark. Elias pressed himself flat into the snow, pulling his white camouflage cover over his head. He held his breath as the drone swept over his position. The thermal camera would pick up his body heat if he wasn't careful. He buried his face in the snow, letting the cold mask his thermal signature, praying the insulated layers of his clothing were enough to blend him into the background. The drone hovered for a terrifying 10 seconds, its mechanical eye searching, before banking away toward the western ridge. Elias exhaled, a shudder running through him. He needed to get closer. He needed to know what they were after. The bear had been a crime of opportunity, but you don't bring this kind of gear for a bear. You bring this kind of gear for something specific. Something high value. He shimmied to his right, finding a narrow fissure in the rocks that led down toward the camp, a blind spot in their sensor grid. It was a dangerous descent, slick with ice, but it offered cover. He moved inches at a time, his fingers hooked into frozen cracks in the granite, his boots seeking purchase on rime-covered ledges. He was 50 feet above them now, looking directly down into the camp. He was close enough to hear their voices. Battery is at 30%. Bring it in for a swap, the man at the monitor said. His voice was American, accented with the flat, clipped vowels of the Midwest. See anything? The man cleaning the rifle asked. He didn't look up, his hands moving with fluid competence over the weapon's bolt assembly. Just deer, a couple of elk bedding down in the treeline. Nothing with the heat signature we want. Is here. The tracker said the range overlap is right in this basin. We just have to flush it. If we flush it at night, we lose the shot quality. The client wants the video, remember? Cinematic kill, he said. Doesn't pay the bonus if the footage is grainy night vision garbage. Elias's jaw tightened. A cinematic kill. They weren't just poachers. They were creating snuff films for wealthy sadists. The depravity of it made his stomach turn. He raised his camera, framing the men. He snapped a series of photos. The faces, the weapons, the drone landing on the table. The shutter was silent, a digital ghost capturing their souls. The tent flap opened, and a third man stepped out. Even from this distance, Elias sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The other two men straightened up, a subconscious reaction to authority. This was the Alpha. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a coat made of wolf fur. Ironic, barbaric, and illegal. He held a steaming mug in one hand and a tablet in the other. His hair was cropped short, blonde, and his face was a landscape of sharp angles and arrogance. "Stop wasting battery on the drone," the leader said. His voice was deeper, carrying a rasp of command. "We know where it is." "We do?" the drone operator asked. "I found the scrape marks on the south ridge. Fresh scat. It's cornered. The heavy snow has pushed it down from the peaks. It's in the caves behind the waterfall. It'll come out when the sun hits the valley floor to warm up. That's when we take it." The leader threw the contents of his mug onto the snow, coffee, steaming in the cold, and placed the tablet on the table, turning it so the others could see. Elias zoomed his lens in. The angle was difficult, oblique, but the screen was bright against the darkness. He focused, his hand trembling slightly from the strain of holding the heavy lens steady. He held his breath and depressed the shutter halfway to engage the autofocus. The image on the tablet sharpened. It was a trail cam photo taken perhaps 2 days ago. It showed a rocky outcrop, dusted with snow, and standing on the rock, looking directly into the lens with eyes that reflected the flash like burning gold orbs, was a creature of myth. A cougar, but not the tawny, phantom gray cats Elias had spent his life tracking. This one was white, pure spectral white, an albino mountain lion. Elias lowered the camera, his breath hitching in his throat. "The ghost," he whispered, the sound no louder than a snowflake landing. The locals whispered about it in bars and diners. A legend passed around like a lucky coin. Most thought it was a hoax, a Photoshop job, or a trick of the light on a normal cat. But Elias had seen the tracks once, 3 years ago. Pads that seemed too large, a gate that seemed too regal. He had never spoken of it, fearing exactly this. He knew that if the location of such a creature ever leaked, every trophy hunter with a heavy wallet and a small soul would descend on the mountain like a plague. "The ghost," the leader said, echoing Elias's thought as if he had plucked it from the air. $500,000 from the buyer in Shanghai, and another $100,000 for the skin from a collector in Dubai. But the video of the kill is the marketing material for the next auction. "What about the vitals?" the rifleman asked. "Where do you want it?" "Not the head. Do not damage the skull. And not the shoulder, I don't want to ruin the cape." "Gut shot," the leader said casually, as if ordering a sandwich. "Put it in the liver. Let it bleed out slow. We need the footage of it dying. That's what they pay for. The struggle." The cruelty of the statement hit Elias like a physical blow. A gut shot was the most agonizing way to die. A slow, burning death of shock and sepsis. To inflict that on purpose for a video. Rage, white-hot and blinding, flared in Elias's chest. For a second, his hand drifted from the camera to the bolt of his Winchester. He had a clear shot. The leader was standing still, 300 yards away, perfectly illuminated by the lantern. Elias knew the ballistics. He knew the drop. He could put a 180-grain bullet through the man's chest before the sound of the shot even reached the camp. It would be justice. It would be war. He thumbed the safety. The metal was cold against his skin. No, the thought was a sharp reprimand. If he fired now, he killed one man. The other two were heavily armed with semi-automatic weapons and had high ground capability with the drone. He had a bolt-action rifle and 5 rounds. He would be suppressed and flanked in minutes. And even if he won, even if he killed them all, he would be a murderer. The law didn't look kindly on vigilantes, even in the wilderness. He needed to destroy them, yes, but he needed to destroy them the right way. He needed to bury them under the weight of the law, to strip them of their freedom and their assets, to make them an example. He needed the evidence. He needed to catch them in the act but prevent the kill. It was a razor-thin line to walk. "Get some sleep," the leader commanded. "We move at 0500. We set up on the ridge opposite the waterfall. When it steps out to sun itself, it's payday." The men dispersed. The leader stood alone for a moment, looking up at the cliffs, his gaze sweeping over the spot where Elias lay hidden. Elias didn't flinch. He was a stone. He was ice. He was nothing. The leader turned and ducked into the tent, zipping the heavy canvas flaps shut. The camp fell silent, save for the hum of the generator. Elias slowly, painstakingly, rolled onto his back. He stared up at the stars, which were hard and bright diamonds in the velvet sky. The Milky Way was a river of crushed ice spanning the heavens. He had the intel. He knew the target, the location, and the time. The ridge opposite the waterfall. He knew that spot. It was a narrow shelf of rock, exposed and windy. A sniper's nest. If they set up there, they would have a commanding view of the cave entrance. The cat wouldn't stand a chance. Elias had to get there first. Or rather, he had to be in a position to stop them. He checked his own position. He was cold, deeply cold. The shivering had stopped, which was a bad sign. Mild hypothermia was setting in. He needed to move to generate heat, but he couldn't leave the basin. He had to wait. He had to endure. He pulled his limbs in tight, transforming into a ball of wool and Gore-Tex, preserving every calorie. He thought of the white cat, sleeping somewhere in the dark caves, unaware that death had encamped at its doorstep. He thought of the bear, mutilated and discarded. He thought of the leader's arrogant face. He let the anger burn. It was a better fuel than wood or gas. Kept the blood moving. The night stretched out, an eternity of freezing minutes. Elias fought the urge to sleep, fighting the siren song of the snow which promised warmth if he just closed his eyes. He counted the stars. He replayed old memories. His daughter's first steps, the smell of his wife's hair, the sound of rain on a tin roof, anchoring his mind against the creeping numbness. Around 0400, the sky to the east began to lighten, shifting from black to a deep, bruising indigo. The air grew even colder, the pre-dawn chill that snapped branches and cracked stones. Movement in the camp below. The zipper of the tent rasped open. The men were awake. Elias forced his stiff muscles to respond. He rolled over, bringing the camera back to his eye. He checked the lens. It was clear of frost. He checked his rifle. The action was free of ice. The poachers were gearing up. They were putting on white oversuits, loading magazines, checking radios. They looked like specters, ghosts of violence preparing to haunt the mountain. "Let's go." The leader's voice drifted up. Quietly, "No Indians." We snowshoe to the ridge. They began to move out, heading toward the eastern slope. Elias waited until they were 100 yards out of camp before he moved. He didn't follow them directly. He knew a shortcut, a dangerous steep scree slope that would drop him onto a flanking spur of rock. It would put him above their position, but perpendicular to their line of fire. It was the only place where he could see both the shooters and the target. He stood up, his knees screaming in protest. He ignored them. He was beyond pain now. He was operating on pure will. He began his traverse, moving parallel to the killers below. The race was on. A slow-motion race through waist-deep snow and lethal terrain. The prize was the life of the last ghost of the Rockies. As the first ray of the sun kissed the highest peak of the range, turning the granite to gold, Elias slid into position behind a twisted juniper tree on the high spur. He set up his camera on a small beanbag rest on a rock. He set the shutter speed to 1/2000th of a second, fast enough to freeze a bullet in flight. Then he settled his rifle next to it. Below him, 200 yards down, the three poachers were setting up. They were laying out shooting mats. The leader was adjusting the elevation turret on his scope. They were focused entirely on the cave entrance across the canyon. Elias looked across the gap. The waterfall was frozen, a suspended pillar of blue ice. Behind it, the dark mouth of a cave yawned open. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The sun crept lower down the mountain face, a spotlight searching for the protagonist. Elias took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs like broken glass. He put his eye to the viewfinder of the camera, his finger hovering over the shutter. With his other hand, he reached out and touched the cold wood of his rifle stock. "Come on," he whispered, though he didn't know who he was speaking to. The cat, the sun, or God. Showtime. The sun did not rise. It ignited. The first direct rays struck the upper crest of the frozen waterfall, turning the suspended blue ice into a blinding pillar of diamonds that seared the retina. Elias Thorne squinted against the glare, shifting his weight on the jagged spur of rock that served as his eyrie. The cold was no longer a sensation but a state of being, a numbness that had penetrated the layers of wool and Gore-Tex to settle deep in his marrow. His breath, shallow and controlled, formed tiny crystals in his beard, welding the coarse hair to his scarf. He was a statue of frost and resolve, perched 300 feet above the killing floor, overlooking the stage where a tragedy was scripted to unfold. Below him, across the chasm of the canyon, the three men were small, dark blots against the pristine white of the ridge. Through the high-definition glass of his telephoto lens, Elias could see the tension in their posture. They were no longer the casual, coffee-drinking campers of the night before. They were executioners on the clock. The shooter, the man with the suppressed long-range rifle, lay prone on a camouflage mat, his body angled perfectly toward the cave mouth. The spotter, the leader in the wolf fur coat, knelt beside him, a laser rangefinder pressed to his eyes. The third man, the tech specialist, stood slightly behind them, operating a handheld gimbal camera, ready to capture the cinematic kill that would fetch a fortune from a collector who would never set foot in these mountains. Elias checked his own camera settings for the 100th time. ISO 4K. Shutter speed January 2000. Burst mode engaged. He framed the shot, ensuring the poachers were in the lower third of the image, leaving the upper two-thirds open for the cave entrance. He needed them in the same frame as the animal. He needed the line of fire established. He needed the incontrovertible proof that this was not self-defense, not an accident, but a premeditated slaughter. The waiting was the hardest part. It always was. In the silence of the high alpine, time distorted. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into hours. The wind whispered through the crags, sounding like voices of the dead trappers and natives who had walked these peaks centuries ago. Elias felt a kinship with them now. He was the last line of defense in a war that most of the world didn't even know was being fought. Wind check. The leader's voice drifted up, carried by the acoustics of the canyon. 3 miles per hour, full value from the left, the shooter replied, his voice a monotone drone. Dialing 2 clicks left. Copy. 2 clicks. Ready on the camera? Rolling. The tech guy confirmed. Battery is good. Storage is clear. Make it count. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that threatened to spoil his aim. He forced himself to breathe through his nose, using the sniper breathing techniques he had learned 40 years ago at Paris Island. Inhale, exhale, pause, and then movement. It started as a shadow detaching itself from the darkness of the cave mouth behind the frozen waterfall. At first, it looked like a trick of the light, a shifting of the ice. But then the shadow took form. A paw, massive and plush, placed tentatively on the sun-warmed rock. Then a shoulder, rippling with muscle beneath a coat of impossible whiteness. The ghost emerged. Elias had seen many mountain lions in his life. He had seen the tawny, dust-colored cats of the desert and the slate-gray stalkers of the timberline. But he had never seen anything like this. The animal was a masterpiece of evolution, a creature that seemed to have been forged from the snow itself. Its fur was not just white. It was pearlescent, catching the morning sun and refracting it into a soft, glowing halo. Its eyes, alert and intelligent, were a piercing, icy blue, a genetic anomaly that made it look otherworldly. The great cat stepped fully onto the ledge, stretching its long, sinuous back. It yawned, exposing formidable ivory canines, and then sat on its haunches, turning its face toward the sun, soaking in the warmth after the long, freezing night. It was the picture of regal innocence. It was a queen surveying her kingdom, unaware that the usurpers were already at the gate. Target acquired, the shooter whispered. Range, 215 yards. Got him, the leader said, his voice thick with greed. Look at that coat. Not a mark on it. Perfection. Wait for the profile, the cameraman hissed. I need the side profile. I want the sun backlighting the fur when he drops. Elias's finger tightened on the shutter button. Click whir, click whir, click whir. The mirror of his DSLR slapped up and down in a rapid staccato rhythm. He captured the cat in its glory. He shifted the focus. He captured the shooter's finger hovering over the trigger. He captured the leader's face, twisted in a grin of anticipation. He had it. He had the conspiracy. He had the intent. If he walked away now, he could bury them in federal court. The photos on his memory card were enough to send them to prison for a decade. But if he walked away now, the cat died. He's turning, the spotter said. Broadside. Now, send it. Got shot, remember? Low and back. Elias saw the shooter inhale. He saw the subtle shift of the shoulder as the stock settled into the pocket. The physics of death were in motion. The bullet would leave the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second. It would cross the canyon in a fraction of a heartbeat. It would tear through the soft white fur of the cat's abdomen, shattering the liver and perforating the intestines, ensuring a slow, agonizing death that would look dramatic on 4K video. Elias Thorne was a hunter. He had killed many animals, but he had killed them with respect, with a clean shot to the heart or lungs, instant and merciful. This was obscenity. The choice was made before he even consciously acknowledged it. He dropped the camera. It swung wildly on its strap, banging against his chest. His gloved hands found the familiar walnut stock of the Winchester. He didn't have time to find a perfect rest. He didn't have time to calculate the wind. He brought the rifle up, the iron sights aligning instinctively. He couldn't shoot the men. That was murder. He couldn't shoot the cat. He aimed for the rock face directly in front of the mountain lion's paws. Fire, the leader commanded. Crack. Elias's rifle spoke first. The vintage 30-06 round roared across the canyon, a thunderclap that shattered the morning stillness. The bullet struck the granite ledge 6 inches from the cat's front left paw. The impact was explosive. Stone fragments sprayed like shrapnel. The sound of the bullet striking rock, a high-pitched zing, ricocheted through the amphitheater. The reaction of the animal was instantaneous. The ghost didn't look around. It didn't pause to investigate. It simply evaporated. 1 second it was there, a solid creature of flesh and blood. The next, it was a blur of white motion, launching itself backward into the darkness of the cave with a speed that the human eye could barely track. A split second later, the poacher's rifle fired. But the suppressed shot was a quiet cough compared to Elias's cannon. The bullet whizzed through the empty air where the cat's lungs had been a moment before, slapping harmlessly into the ice of the waterfall, sending a shower of crystals cascading down. Missed! The leader screamed, his voice cracking with rage. You missed it! What the hell was that? The shooter yelled, rolling onto his back, scanning the cliffs. Someone fired. That wasn't an echo. Silence hung in the valley for a terrifying heartbeat. The smoke from Elias's barrel drifted lazily into the cold air, a gray finger pointing directly at his position. Contact! The spotter roared, pointing up at the spur where Elias lay. 11 o'clock high, on the rock spur. I see the smoke. Elias scrambled back, abandoning his prone position. He grabbed his camera, tucking it inside his jacket to protect the card. He had done it. He had saved the cat. But he had just declared war on 3 armed men in the middle of nowhere. Kill him! The leader's voice was a primal shriek. No witnesses. Light him up. The canyon erupted. The suppressor on the sniper rifle made the incoming fire terrifyingly quiet. There was no boom, only the supersonic crack of the bullets passing inches from Elias's head. Snap, snap, snap. Rock chips exploded into his face. A shard of granite sliced his cheek, warm blood instantly freezing on his skin. Elias rolled, throwing himself behind the bulk of the juniper tree just as a round disintegrated the branch he had been resting his arm on. Automatic fire. The leader yelled. Suppress him. Keep his head down. The man with the AR platform rifle joined in. The rhythm changed from the slow, precise shots of the sniper to the rapid, angry bark of semi-automatic fire. Bullets chewed up the snow around Elias, kicking up plumes of white powder that blinded him. They were walking the fire toward him, pinning him against the cliff face. Elias huddled in the fetal position behind the tree, clutching his old bolt-action rifle. He was outgunned. He was outmanned. And he was trapped. The spur was a dead end. To go up, he had to climb a sheer face, which would leave him exposed for minutes. To go down meant charging directly into their line of fire. Flank him! The voice drifted up. Joey, take the drone. See if you can spot his exact position. Mike, keep firing. I'm going up the scree slope. They were closing the net. Elias checked his rifle. He cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. Tumbled into the snow, smoking hot. For rounds left, he couldn't win a firefight. His only advantage was the terrain, but they were taking that away from him. He needed a distraction. He needed chaos. He risked a glance over the top of the rock. The drone was airborne, buzzing like a hornet, rising rapidly toward his altitude. Once that camera saw him, they would be able to direct their fire with surgical precision. Elias shouldered his rifle. He took a deep breath, ignoring the bullets chipping away at his cover. He tracked the drone. It was a small target moving erratically in the wind. A difficult shot for a sniper, let alone an old man with iron sights and shaking hands. He led the target. Swing, swing, fire. The rifle kicked against his bruised shoulder. The drone didn't explode. He missed, but the shockwave of the bullet passing close by, or perhaps a lucky nick on a propeller, sent the machine spiraling out of control. It smashed into the cliff face 20 feet below him, raining plastic and sparks down onto the slope. He shot the drone. Bastard! The suppression fire intensified. Elias pressed his face into the snow. He couldn't stay here. The leader was climbing the scree slope, the same shortcut Elias had considered taking earlier. If the man reached the ridge, he would be on Elias's flank within 10 minutes. Elias looked behind him. There was a narrow chute, a chimney in the rock, filled with ice and loose debris. It was a suicide run, a steep, uncontrolled slide that dropped into the darkness of the ravine on the other side of the spur. It was a blind descent. He could break a leg. He could slide off a cliff. But staying here meant a bullet in the head. Hey! Elias shouted, his voice hoarse. I've got your faces. It's all on the cloud. You kill me, the upload finishes. It was a bluff. There was no cell service here, no internet. But he hoped the mention of the cloud would make them hesitate, make them wonder if he had a satellite uplink. The firing stopped for a second. Bullshit! The leader yelled back. There's no signal in the basin. He's bluffing. Mike, cover me. I'm moving up. The bluff failed. Elias grimaced. He tightened the straps of his pack, securing the camera against his body. He grabbed his rifle. He crawled toward the ice chute. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders. He looked down. It was a dark throat of shadow, angling sharply downward. Here goes nothing, he muttered. He didn't climb down, he launched himself. He threw his body into the chute, feet first, leaning back to use his pack as a sled. Gravity took hold instantly. He accelerated, the rock walls blurring past him. The ride was violent. He bounced off the granite walls, the impacts jarring his teeth. Ice and snow sprayed into his face, blinding him. He was a ragdoll in a laundry chute, tumbling out of control. He hit a patch of loose shale and spun around, sliding backward now. Panic flared. He clawed at the walls, trying to slow his descent, but his gloves just skidded over the icy rock. Then the chute ended. He flew out into empty space. For a terrifying second, he was airborne. He flailed his arms, seeing the tops of pine trees below him. He fell 10, maybe 15 feet, and crashed into a deep drift of powder snow at the base of the ravine. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He lay there, gasping, staring up at the slice of blue sky between the canyon walls. His body screamed in protest. His bad knee was throbbing with a sickening heat. He tasted blood in his mouth. But he was alive, and he was out of the line of fire. Above him, on the other side of the ridge, he heard shouting. Where did he go? I don't see him. He must have gone down the chimney. Check the bottom. Elias forced himself to sit up. The snow around him was waist deep. He was in the shadow of the mountain now, in the deep freeze of the ravine floor. He checked his camera. The lens hood was cracked, but the body looked intact. He checked the rifle. The barrel was packed with snow, useless until he cleared it. He struggled to his feet, crying out as his left leg took his weight. It wasn't broken, but he had twisted it bad. He limped forward, using the rifle as a crutch. He couldn't go back the way he came. They would be watching the trails. He had to go deeper. He had to head toward the river, toward the box canyon that led to the old logging roads. It was the long way around. A 20-mile trek through the harshest terrain in the state, with 3 killers on his tail who had snowmobiles and radios. And he was leaving a trail of blood. He looked down at his thigh. The old wound had opened up, or maybe he had snagged it on a rock. Bright red drops were painting the snow every few feet. Damn it, he hissed. He heard the roar of an engine starting up above. They were bringing the snowmobiles around. They were going to cut him off at the pass. Elias Thorne turned his collar up against the wind. He was wounded, exhausted, and hunted. But he had the photos. The ghost was safe, at least for today. Now, he just had to survive long enough to tell the story. He started to run, a loping, broken gait, disappearing into the dense timber of the ravine just as the sound of snowmobiles grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like the trumpets of the apocalypse. The impact with the snowdrift at the bottom of the ravine had been soft, a deceptive embrace that masked the violence of the fall, but the landing itself had jarred every bone in Elias Thorne's body. He lay there for a long moment, staring up at the slit of gray sky framed by the towering granite walls, his breath coming in ragged, steaming gasps. The silence that followed his descent was heavy, broken only by the frantic pounding of his own heart, which hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. But then the silence was violated. Above him, on the ridge he had just vacated, the roar of engines flared to life. It was a guttural, mechanical scream, high-performance 2-stroke engines revving in anger. Elias forced himself to move. The first attempt sent a spike of white-hot agony shooting up his left leg, originating from the old titanium pin in his knee and radiating into the fresh, wet warmth of the bullet graze on his thigh. He gritted his teeth, a guttural growl vibrating in his chest, and rolled onto his side. He checked his rifle first, the instinct of a soldier ingrained deep within him. The barrel was packed with snow. He pulled off a glove with his teeth, his hand trembling as he dug the pinky finger into the muzzle to clear the obstruction, blowing into the action to melt the ice. It wasn't perfect, but it would fire. He struggled to his feet, using a sapling for leverage. The world spun, a dizzying carousel of white and gray, before settling into a grim, sharp focus. He was in the Devil's Throat, a narrow, twisting canyon that acted as a drainage for the high peaks. In spring, this was a raging torrent of whitewater. In winter, it was a chaotic jumble of frozen deadfall, boulders the size of cars hidden under powder, and treacherous hollows find him. He went down the chute. The voice echoed from above, distorted by the wind but unmistakable. It was the leader. Joey, take the east rim. Mike, bring the sled down the logging cut. Flush him out. Elias checked his surroundings. The logging cut was a mile down, a scar in the forest that would allow the snowmobiles to descend into the canyon floor. He had perhaps 20 minutes before the machines were on top of him. On flat ground, a man on snowshoes could never outrun a snowmobile. But this wasn't flat ground. This was the devil's throat. He didn't run. Running was for prey, and prey died tired. Elias moved with a limping, deliberate cadence, his eyes scanning the terrain not for an exit, but for a weapon. He was outgunned, outmanned, and wounded. His only ally was the mountain itself. He had to turn the landscape against them. He had to make them fight the land. He tightened the straps of his pack, feeling the hard lump of the camera against his spine, the digital witness that made him a target for execution. He adjusted his course, heading not away from the logging cut, but toward a dense cluster of lodgepole pines that had been decimated by a beetle kill years ago. It was a graveyard of trees, a tangle of fallen timber and standing deadwood. To a snowmobile, it was a nightmare. To a man on foot, it was a fortress. As he entered the timber, the pain in his leg settled into a dull, throbbing rhythm. He looked down. The blood had soaked through his camouflage pants, turning the fabric stiff and dark. He was leaving a trail, a bright, red line of breadcrumbs for the wolves to follow. He stopped, scooping up a handful of snow and pressing it against the wound, hissing as the cold burned the raw nerve endings. It wouldn't stop the bleeding, but it might slow it. He couldn't hide the trail, so he had to use it. He heard the first engine drop into the canyon. The sound changed pitch, deepening as the machine hit the valley floor and began to chew through the deep powder. It was coming from the south. That would be Mike, the aggressive one, the one who liked to shoot fast. Elias moved deeper into the deadfall, climbing over the rot of a fallen giant. He found a spot where two massive trunks had fallen across each other, creating a natural funnel, a choke point barely 4 feet wide. He moved through it, then stopped. He backtracked, stepping carefully in his own footprints, deepening them, making the limp obvious. He walked backward through the gap, then hooked completely to the left, climbing up onto the trunk of the fallen tree, lying flat against the rough bark, covering himself with loose branches and snow. He became part of the wood. He waited. The roar grew louder, a physical vibration in the air. The smell of unburnt fuel arrived before the machine, stinging Elias's nostrils. Then the snowmobile burst into view. It was a black and yellow beast, skis kicking up a storm of powder. The rider was standing up, leaning forward, a submachine gun slung across his chest. He was following the blood trail, his eyes fixed on the red spots in the snow. The rider saw the gap between the trees. He saw the tracks leading through it. He didn't hesitate. He gunned the throttle, the engine screaming as the track spun, biting for traction to blast through the opening. But the rider didn't know the snow depth. He didn't know that beneath the powder in that specific gap lay a jagged stump, hidden and waiting. The right ski of the snowmobile caught the stump at 30 miles per hour. The sound was sickening, the crunch of metal and fiberglass, the snap of suspension arms. The snowmobile pitched violently to the right, catapulting the rider over the handlebars. The man flew through the air, flailing, and slammed chest first into the trunk of a pine tree 10 feet away. He crumpled into the snow and didn't move. The snowmobile rolled onto its side, the track still spinning lazily in the air, the engine sputtering before dying. Silence rushed back into the clearing, heavier than before. Elias didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He rolled off the log, landing heavily on his good leg. He approached the fallen rider, rifle raised. The man was groaning now, clutching his chest. Ribs broken, maybe a collapsed lung. He was out of the fight. Elias reached the man and kicked the submachine gun away into a deep drift. He knelt, patting the man down, removing a sidearm and a radio. You crazy old. The man wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. Radio, Elias said, his voice flat. Tell them you lost me. Tell them I went up the north wall. The man stared at him, eyes wide with pain and fear. Screw you. The boss. He'll skin you alive. Elias grabbed the radio. He didn't need the man to speak. He pressed the transmit button. Mike? Mike, report. The leader's voice crackled, tense and angry. Elias held the button down and fired a single shot from the captured pistol into the air. Bang! Then he let the button go. "Mike, talk to me." Elias leaned close to the radio. "Mike can't talk right now," he whispered. His voice graveled and low. "He had an accident. You should check your insurance policy." He smashed the radio against the tree trunk, shattering the plastic casing. He looked at the injured man. "Stay here. If you move, the cold will kill you. If you stay, your friends might find you before you freeze." Elias turned and vanished back into the trees. He had bought himself time, but he had also enraged the beast. They wouldn't be careless now. They would be hunting for blood. He pushed north, moving parallel to the frozen river. His energy was fading. The adrenaline dump from the ambush had left him shaking, and the cold was beginning to claw its way into his core. His fingers felt like sausages, clumsy and numb inside his gloves. He needed to get to the limestone caves near the treeline. It was a defensible position, and more importantly, it was a place where he could try to stabilize his leg. But the mountain wasn't done with him. As he crossed a small clearing, a buzzing sound caught his ear. Not a snowmobile. Smaller, higher, another drone. He looked up. A second quadcopter was hovering 200 feet above, a black silhouette against the glare of the noon sun. He had destroyed one, but they had spares. Of course they did. The drone didn't attack. It just hovered, watching. It was the Eye of Sauron. "He's in the clearing, Sector 4. The voice didn't come from a radio. It came from the sky, amplified by a speaker on the drone. "I see him. He's heading for the river." Elias broke into a run, ignoring the screaming protest of his knee. He dove into the thick willow brush lining the riverbank. Bullets began to chew up the snow behind him. Thwip, thwip, thwip. They were firing from the ridge, shooting blindly at the coordinates the drone was providing. He crawled through the willows, the branches whipping his face, tearing at his clothes. He reached the edge of the river. The water was not fully frozen here. Dark, black water churned through channels in the ice, steaming in the cold air. He had to cross. The bridge was a mile upstream. Too far. He had to trust the ice. He slid onto his belly, spreading his weight. The ice groaned beneath him, a terrifying, resonant bass note that vibrated through his chest. He clawed his way forward, inch by inch. Above him, the drone lowered, buzzing angrily, trying to get a clear view through the river mist. A bullet struck the ice a foot from his head, sending a shower of razor-sharp shards into his eyes. Elias flinched, sliding sideways. The ice cracked. A spiderweb of fractures shot out from his elbow. "Don't shoot the water." The leader's voice echoed from the ridge. "You'll drown the camera. I want the card." They wanted the evidence more than they wanted his death. That was his leverage. Elias reached the center of the river. The current was strong here, the ice thin and black. He could see the water rushing beneath, a cold death waiting to pull him under. He looked up at the drone. It was hovering low now, maybe 30 feet up. He pulled the captured pistol from his pocket. He didn't aim for the drone. He aimed for the ice bank on the far side, where a heavy shelf of snow hung precariously over the water. He fired 3 rounds into the snowbank. The reverberation was enough. The cornice, heavy with weeks of accumulation, sheared off. Tons of snow collapsed into the river with a thunderous whoosh, creating a massive splash of slush and water that erupted upward. The spray hit the drone. The propellers chopped into the heavy slush, shattering instantly. The machine spiraled down, crashing into the black water and disappearing beneath the current. "Blind?" Elias gasped, dragging himself onto the far bank. "You're blind again." He rolled into the safety of the trees on the north bank, shivering violently. His clothes were soaked from the slush. Wet and cold, the 2 horsemen of the hypothermic apocalypse. He had to keep moving. He had to generate heat. He limped up the slope, heading toward the limestone formations. The pain in his leg was now a constant, blinding white noise, but beneath it, a strange clarity had formed. He wasn't just surviving, he was analyzing. There were 2 of them left. The leader, Alpha, and the tech guy, Joey. Mike was down. They were angry, they were desperate, and they were losing their technological advantage. This was dragging them down to his level, to the primal level. He reached the caves as the afternoon light began to fade. The entrance was a narrow slit in the rock, hidden by juniper bushes. He squeezed inside, collapsing onto the dry, dusty floor. It smelled of rat droppings and old earth, but it was out of the wind. Elias fumbled for his headlamp but didn't turn it on. He worked by feel. He pulled a knife from his belt and slit his pant leg open. The smell of copper and iron filled the small space. He felt the wound. It was ugly, ragged edges, hot to the touch, sticky with congealing blood. He took his scarf, cut it into strips, and bound the wound tight. He screamed silently into his gloved hand as he tightened the knot, tears leaking from his eyes. He dug into his pack and found a small foil packet emergency energy gel. He squeezed the synthetic goo into his mouth, swallowing it without tasting. Sugar. He needed sugar to keep his brain working. He checked the camera. It was battered, wet, but the green light still blinked when he touched the power button. The card was safe. "Come and get it," he whispered to the darkness. He couldn't stay here. If they found the cave, they could just toss a grenade in or smoke him out. He needed to be on the move, but he needed rest. Just 10 minutes. He closed his eyes. Crunch. The sound was soft, rhythmic. Snowshoes on crust. Elias's eyes snapped open. They were close. How had they tracked him across the river? Then he looked at his boot. A slow, steady drip of blood was pooling on the limestone floor. He hadn't stopped the bleeding. He had just slowed it. "I see a blood trail heading into the rocks," a voice said. It was Joey. He sounded terrified. "Boss, I don't want to go in there." He took out Mike. He took out the drones. "He's an old man, Joey." The Alpha's voice replied, closer, smoother. "He's bleeding out. He's probably unconscious. You want that bonus? You want to be rich? Go in there and drag him out. Why don't you go? Because I'm covering you. Go." Elias gripped his rifle. He had 2 rounds left. 2 rounds for 2 men. But he couldn't shoot Joey if Joey was just a pawn. Or could he? The rules of civilization were fading fast. He looked deeper into the cave. A draft was coming from the back. A chimney-like airflow. This wasn't a dead end. It was a tunnel. Elias stood up, biting through his lip to stifle a groan. He moved deeper into the dark, feeling his way along the wall. Behind him, the light from the entrance was blocked by a shadow. "Hello?" Joey called out, his voice trembling. "Mr. Thorne? Look, we just want the card. Give us the card and we walk away. We'll even call a medevac for you." Elias ignored him. He found the rear exit, a tight squeeze leading upward. He pulled himself through, scraping his chest and back, fighting claustrophobia and pain. He emerged onto a high ledge, 50 feet above the cave entrance. He looked down. Joey was inching into the cave, rifle raised. The Alpha was standing outside, leaning against a tree, smoking a cigarette, looking bored. He held his rifle loosely, confident. Elias raised his Winchester. He had a clear shot at the Alpha, but the angle was steep, and his hands were shaking uncontrollably from the cold. If he missed, he gave away his position with no exit strategy. He looked at the snowpack above the Alpha, a massive drift of wind-loaded snow, hanging off the lip of the cliff. It was unstable. The afternoon sun had been baking it for hours. Elias didn't shoot the man. He didn't shoot the snow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy brass casing, a spent shell from earlier. He threw it, not at them, at the drift above them. The casing hit the snow with a dull thwack. It wasn't enough to trigger an avalanche. Elias cursed. He needed more weight. He looked around. A rock, the size of a grapefruit, lay loose near his foot. He grabbed it. He leaned over the edge and hurled it with the last of his strength. The rock struck the center of the cornice. Crack. The sound was like a whip. A fracture line shot across the face of the snow. "Run!" Elias shouted. It wasn't mercy. It was instinct. The Alpha looked up, eyes widening. He saw the white wave detaching from the cliff. He didn't even scream. He dove to the side, scrambling behind the trunk of a massive spruce tree. The avalanche swept down. It wasn't a mountain killer, but it was enough to bury the cave entrance and the clearing in 10 feet of heavy, wet cement like snow. The world turned white. The sound was a roar that vibrated in Elias's teeth. When the dust settled, the cave entrance was gone. Joey was trapped inside. The alpha was half buried, digging himself out from behind the tree, coughing snow. Elias slumped against the rock wall. He had trapped one, but the leader was still free. And now, the leader knew exactly where Elias was. The alpha pulled himself free. He lost his rifle in the slide, but he pulled a large revolver from a shoulder holster. He looked up at the ledge, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He didn't look like a hunter anymore. He looked like a demon. "You're dead, Thorne," he screamed, pointing the gun up at the ledge. "I'm going to carve you up piece by piece." Elias didn't answer. He turned and limped away, heading toward the highest point of the ridge, Black Ridge. There was nowhere else to go. The sun was setting, and the clouds were gathering in the west. Heavy, dark clouds. A storm was coming. A blizzard. Elias smiled a cracked, bloody smile. The storm was his friend. The storm was the great equalizer. He began the final ascent, leaving a trail of blood on the pristine snow, leading the monster behind him toward the edge of the world. The storm arrived not as a weather event, but as a geological force, a shifting of the tectonic plates of the sky. The heavy, leaden clouds that had been gathering in the west finally broke, collapsing under their own weight and unleashing a white fury upon the Black Ridge. It was a blizzard of biblical proportions, a whiteout that erased the horizon, the ground, and the sky, blending them all into a singular, suffocating void of swirling ice. For Elias Thorne, the storm was both a shroud and a weapon. It hid him from the eyes of the man hunting him, but it was also killing him, minute by freezing minute. He was no longer walking. He was dragging himself, a broken automaton fueled by a flickering pilot light of stubbornness. His left leg was useless, a dead weight of agony that he had to haul through the deepening drifts. The makeshift bandage had frozen solid, a bloody tourniquet that felt like a ring of iron clamped around his thigh. Every step was a negotiation with gravity, a plea to his failing muscles to contract one more time. The wind, screaming at 60 miles per hour across the exposed ridge, tore at his clothes, finding every gap, every seam, stinging his skin with needles of ice. He was climbing into the death zone, the highest point of the valley, a serrated knife edge of granite where the earth met the sky. He checked his watch, but the face was cracked and frosted over. Time had lost its meaning. There was only the rhythm. Step, drag, breathe, step, drag, breathe. Behind him, somewhere in the white maelstrom, was the Alpha. Elias knew he was there. He could feel him. The man, Vance, he had heard the others call him, was not giving up. He had lost his team, his equipment, and his prize, and now he was running on the pure, distilled toxicity of revenge. Vance was a trophy hunter in the truest, sickest sense. He didn't care about the meat or the challenge. He cared about possession. And right now, the only trophy he wanted was Elias's life. Elias reached the summit of the ridge. The wind here was ferocious, threatening to peel him off the rock face and hurl him into the abyss below. To his left was a sheer drop of 2,000 feet, down into the darkened throat of the valley where the river snake. To his right, the steep, avalanche-prone slopes he had just ascended. He found a small depression behind a boulder, a shallow scoop in the rock that offered a modicum of shelter. He collapsed into it, his lungs burning as if he had inhaled fire. He pulled the satellite phone from his pocket. The screen was sluggish, the liquid crystal freezing in the cold. For percent battery, it was a blinking red eye of doom. He extended the antenna, pointing it toward the southern horizon, praying to satellites orbiting in the silent vacuum of space, searching for signal. "Come on," Elias rasped, his lips cracked and bleeding. "Don't you die on me. Not yet. 1 bar. He hit the speed dial for the direct line to the USFWS regional office. The phone purred, a digital trill that sounded absurdly cheerful against the backdrop of the howling wind. Click. Agent Miller. A voice answered, crisp and warm, a world away in a heated office. Sarah. Elias's voice was a whisper, shredded by the wind. He coughed, a wet, hacking sound that tasted of copper. It's Elias. Elias? You're breaking up. I can barely hear you. Where are you? Black Ridge. Summit. He had to conserve words. Every syllable cost energy he didn't have. Poaching ring. International. Heavily armed. I have the evidence. The ghost. She's safe for now. But I'm done, Sarah. Elias, listen to me. Sarah's voice shifted, dropping the professional veneer for urgent concern. We have the beacon from your last call. Search and rescue is grounded due to the storm. SWAT is in vehicles moving up the logging road. But the snow is too deep. They're hours away. You have to hunker down. Can you build a shelter? No time. Elias looked back down the trail. Through the swirling snow, he saw a dark shape moving. A shadow within the shadow. Vance was close. He's here. The leader. He's coming. Elias, evade him. Hide. I can't run anymore, Sarah. I'm going to secure the package. He looked at the camera bag clutched to his chest. If I don't make it, look for the marker. The cairn by the split rock. Coordinates. He read the numbers off the GPS display on the phone, his vision blurring. Elias, keep the line open. Battery's dying. Get here, Sarah. Get the bastards. The phone beeped once, a mournful, electronic tone, and the screen went black. The link to the world was severed. He was alone at the top of the world. Elias shoved the dead phone back into his pocket. He turned his attention to the camera. His hands were numb blocks of wood, devoid of dexterity. It took him an agonizing minute to unzip the bag. He pulled out the SD card, a tiny square of plastic that held the fate of men and beasts. He looked at it. A few gigabytes of data, pictures of a white cat, pictures of men with guns. It seemed so small to weigh so much. He looked around his small fortress of rock. There was a deep fissure in the granite, a crack formed by centuries of freeze and thaw. He took the SD card, wrapped it in a piece of waterproof wrapper from his energy bar, and jammed it deep into the fissure. He packed snow over it, pounding it hard until it turned to ice. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the spent brass casing from his 30-06, the one he had saved. He pressed the casing into the snow directly over the hiding spot. A brass tombstone. Safe, he whispered. He struggled to his feet. He wouldn't die on his knees. He wouldn't die hiding. He grabbed his rifle. It was empty. He had fired his last rounds at the cornice to trigger the avalanche. It was nothing more than a club now, a piece of wood and steel. He used it to prop himself up, leaning against the boulder, facing the direction the shadow had come from. He waited. The wind howled, a banshee scream that tore at his sanity. And then, the storm parted, just for a moment, and Vance stepped out of the white. He looked like a revenant. The expensive fur coat was shredded, hanging in tatters. His face was a mask of dried blood and snow, the skin purple with frostbite. He had lost his hat, and his blonde hair was matted with ice. He moved with a jerky, manic energy, adrenaline and rage overriding the body's shutdown sequence. In his right hand, he held the large-caliber revolver, the metal dark and deadly. Vance stopped 10 yards away. He saw Elias standing there, swaying slightly in the wind, broken but unbowed. A twisted smile spread across Vance's face, cracking his split lips. "You are," Vance shouted over the wind, his voice thin and reedy, "the most annoying pest I have ever encountered." Elias didn't answer. He just tightened his grip on the rifle stock. "Where is it?" Vance took a step forward, raising the gun, the camera, the card. "Give it to me and I'll make it quick." A bullet to the head. Lights out. No more cold. Elias stared at him. He felt a strange detachment, a calm that settled over him like a warm blanket. He was going to die. He accepted it. And in that acceptance, there was power. "It's gone," Elias said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Uploaded. To the cloud." Vance laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You tried that bluff already. There's no signal up here. You have it on you. I know you do. You're the type who holds on to things. Honor. Duty. Evidence." Vance took another step. He was 5 yards away now. "You ruined everything, old man. Do you know how much money I lost today? Do you know who I answer to? Dead men don't pay debts. Neither do prisoners," Elias said. "I'm not going to prison. I'm going to walk off this mountain, tell a story about a hunting accident, and disappear. But first, I'm going to take what's mine." Vance cocked the hammer of the revolver. Click. The sound was crisp, cutting through the roar of the blizzard. Last chance. The card. Elias looked Vance in the eye. He saw the hollowness there, the void where a soul should be. "You want the card? Come and get it." Vance's eyes narrowed. "Have it your way." He fired. The bullet didn't hit Elias in the head. Vance was shivering, and the wind was gusting. The round struck Elias in the left shoulder, spinning him around. The impact was like being hit by a sledgehammer. Elias slammed into the boulder, the breath driven from him. He slid down the rock face, leaving a smear of bright crimson. He didn't feel pain. The cold had taken that away. He just felt a sudden, profound heaviness. His arm hung uselessly at his side. Vance walked forward, closing the distance. He holstered the gun and grabbed Elias by the front of his jacket, hauling him up with surprising strength. He slammed Elias back against the rock. "Where is it?" Vance screamed, spitting in Elias's face. He began to tear at Elias's pockets, ripping the zippers. He found the satellite phone. He threw it over the cliff. He found the empty energy gel wrapper. He threw it away. He found the camera bag. Vance ripped the bag open, dumping the camera into the snow. He picked it up, smashing it against the rock, cracking the body open. He looked at the empty card slot. "Empty!" Vance shrieked. He turned back to Elias, his hands closing around Elias's throat. "Where did you put it?" Elias couldn't breathe. The world was tunneling down to a pinpoint of light. He saw Vance's face, distorted by rage, swimming before him. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle came out. "Tell me." Vance slammed Elias's head against the granite. Elias's vision flashed white, then black. He was drifting away. It would be so easy to let go, to just sink into the dark. No, he thought of the white cat, the ghost, sitting on the rock, sunning herself. He thought of her cubs, hidden somewhere safe. They were alive because of him. He couldn't leave the job unfinished. Elias summoned the last reserve of his strength, the hysterical strength of a dying man. He didn't try to pull Vance's hands away. Instead, he brought his good knee up, driving it hard into Vance's groin. Vance howled, his grip loosening just for a second. Elias didn't stop. He threw his body weight forward, slamming his forehead into the bridge of Vance's nose. A sickening crunch of cartilage. Vance staggered back, blinding by pain, blood gushing from his nose. He slipped on the icy rock, his arms windmilling. Elias fell to his knees, gasping for air. He watched as Vance fought for balance. The poacher was teetering on the edge of the slope, his heels over the abyss. "Help me!" Vance screamed, his eyes wide with sudden, absolute terror. The rage was gone, replaced by the primal fear of the fall. He reached out a hand toward Elias. Elias looked at the hand. He looked at the man who had ordered the torture of a bear, who had tried to execute a ghost. Elias didn't move. He didn't have the strength to save him, and he wasn't sure he had the will. The wind gusted, a massive shove from the hand of God. Vance lost his footing. He didn't scream as he fell, he just vanished. 1 second he was there, a dark stain on the white world. The next he was gone, swallowed by the storm and the 2,000-foot drop to the river below. Elias was alone again. He slumped against the rock, sitting over the fissure where the SD card lay hidden. He was done. The tank was empty. The cold rushed in to claim its prize. No longer an enemy, but a comforting friend. It wrapped around him, slowing his heart, smoothing out the jagged edges of his pain. Sleep, the wind whispered. Just sleep. Elias closed his eyes. He felt lighter. He felt the phantom warmth of a fireplace, the smell of wood smoke and whiskey. He saw his wife's face, young and smiling, waiting for him. Not yet. A part of his brain whispered, wait for the cavalry. But the cavalry was hours away, and the dark was so inviting. Elias lowered his head to his chest. The snow began to pile up on his shoulders, turning him into another rock on the ridge. His breathing slowed, shallow, ragged, then barely there. But then a sound. Not the wind, not the howl of a wolf. A rhythmic, chopping sound. A heartbeat in the sky. Thump, 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 thump. Elias forced one eye open. The storm was raging, but through the swirling white, a light appeared. A beam of pure, brilliant halogen, cutting through the blizzard like a sword. It swept over the ridge, searching, hunting, passed over him, then snapped back. The light pinned him against the rock, blindingly bright. The roar of the rotor blades grew deafening, drowning out the wind. The downwash kicked up a tornado of snow, stinging his face. Elias tried to raise his hand, to wave, but his arm wouldn't move. He tried to smile, but his face was frozen. The cable dropped from the light. A figure descended, dressed in bright orange, spinning slowly. A distinct shape, a rescuer. The boots hit the rock. The figure unclipped from the line and ran toward him, crouching low against the rotor wash. Hands touched his face. Warm hands. A voice shouted something, but Elias couldn't hear the words. He felt a mask being pressed over his nose and mouth. Oxygen. Pure, sweet oxygen flowed into his lungs. He felt himself being lifted, strapped into a litter. He felt the lurch as he was hoisted into the air, leaving the ground, leaving the blood, leaving the mountain. As he rose toward the belly of the metal angel, Elias looked down one last time. He couldn't see the brass casing he had pushed into the snow. It was buried now, but he knew it was there. The verdict was written in the rock. The bay doors closed. The warmth of the cabin enveloped him. And finally, Elias Thorne allowed himself to close his eyes and drift into the darkness. Not of death, but of rest. The darkness that had swallowed Elias Thorne was not the black void of death, but the sterile, chemically induced gray of a medically induced coma. It was a place without wind, without cold, and without time. When he finally clawed his way back to the surface, the transition was jarring. The roar of the blizzard was replaced by the rhythmic, insistent beeping of a cardiac monitor. The biting wind on his face was replaced by the dry, recycled air of a hospital room in Billings. The first thing he felt was not his body, which seemed to be floating in a haze of narcotics, but a profound, crushing thirst. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt like they were weighted with lead. He managed to flutter, a crack of light that stung his retinas. The room was white, blindingly, aggressively white. For a panic-stricken second, his mind threw him back to the ridge, to the wideout, and his heart rate spiked, triggering a faster tempo from the machine beside him. Easy, Elias. Easy. You're safe. The voice was soft, familiar, and laced with an exhaustion that mirrored his own. A hand, warm and calloused, covered his trembling fingers. Elias forced his eyes open. The blur coalesced into a face. Agent Sarah Miller. She looked terrible. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing a crumpled field jacket that looked like she had slept in it for days. Water, Elias rasped. The word was a jagged shard of glass in his throat. Sarah held a cup with a straw to his lips. The water was lukewarm, but it tasted like the nectar of the gods. He drank greedily until she pulled it away. Slowly, she whispered. You've been out for 4 days. Pneumonia, severe hypothermia, blood loss, and a shoulder that looks like hamburger meat. "You're lucky to be alive, you stubborn old mule." Elias ignored the medical report. His brain was rebooting, the memories of the mountain flooding back in a chaotic torrent. The bear, the white cat, Vance, the fall, the card. His hand shot up, gripping Sarah's wrist with a strength that surprised them both. "The card," he wheezed, his eyes wild. Did you get it?" Sarah hesitated, her expression tightening. That hesitation hit Elias like a physical blow. He tried to sit up, ignoring the searing pain that tore through his left shoulder. "You didn't find it," he accused, his voice breaking. "It's still up there." "Elias, listen," Sarah said, gently pushing him back onto the pillows. "We recovered you. That was the priority." The storm raged for another 48 hours after the extract. The ridge is buried under 10 feet of snow. We couldn't send a team back up to search for a piece of plastic the size of a fingernail in those conditions. It's a needle in a haystack. "It's not a haystack," Elias growled, fighting the fog of the painkillers. "It's a tomb. I marked it. I told you. The fissure behind the boulder. The brass casing." "We know, Elias, but the snow. The snow protects it," he interrupted, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "But the thaw. If someone else finds it, or if the water destroys it." "Sarah, that card is the only thing that matters." "Vance," he fell. "But the network, the buyers, they're still out there. Without the card, it's just my word against a ghost story." Sarah looked at him, seeing the fire that still burned in the old hunter's eyes. She saw the guilt, the burden of the witness. She knew then that he wouldn't rest, wouldn't heal until that loop was closed. "I'm going up tomorrow," she said quietly. "The weather is clearing. A Chinook wind is blowing in. It's melting the lower drifts. I'll take a team. I'll find your brass casing, Elias. Promise." Elias sank back into the pillows, the adrenaline fading, leaving him hollow. "The split rock," he whispered, his eyes closing again. "Due north of the drop zone. Don't let the mountain win." The next 24 hours were an agony of waiting. Elias lay in the hospital bed, staring at the clock on the wall, counting the seconds. Every tick was a moment where the evidence could be degrading, where the truth could be lost forever. He refused the heavy sedatives, terrified that if he slept, he would wake up to bad news. He watched the local news on the small television suspended from the ceiling. They were reporting on the rescue of a local man and the suspected death of an unidentified male in the Absorca-Beartooth wilderness. Vance's body hadn't been recovered yet. The river canyon was too treacherous. The narrative was already being spun, a hunting accident, a tragedy. No mention of the cartel. No mention of the murder. Without the proof, history would be rewritten by the silence. On the afternoon of the second day, the door to his room opened. It wasn't a nurse. It was Sarah. She was wearing fresh clothes, but her boots were muddy, and she smelled of cold air and pine resin. She walked to the bedside table and placed a small, clear plastic evidence bag on the white surface. Inside, sitting on a bed of cotton, was a battered SanDisk memory card. And next to it, tarnished but unmistakable, was a spent 30-06 brass casing. Elias let out a breath he felt he had been holding for a lifetime. Tears, hot and unbidden, pricked his eyes. He reached out and touched the plastic bag, tracing the shape of the casing. "It was exactly where you said," Sarah said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Buried under 6 feet of hardpack. We had to chip it out with ice axes, but the seal held. The card is dry. Did you look?" "We just downloaded the raw files," Sarah nodded. She pulled a tablet from her bag. "The legal team is already drafting the warrants. But I thought you should see it first, to know that it was worth it." She tapped the screen. The video player opened. The footage was stable, high definition. It showed the poachers in the camp, their faces clear, their voices distinct as they discussed the cinematic kill and the buyer in Shanghai. It showed the mutilated bear, and then the photos, the sequence of the white mountain lion stepping onto the ledge, the crosshairs, the finger on the trigger, and then the moment of chaos, The rock exploding. The cat vanishing. The look of shock on Vance's face. It was all there. Irrefutable. Damning. The metadata gives us everything, Sarah said. Time, date, GPS location. We ran facial recognition on the other two, the ones you trapped. They're already in custody. One has a collapsed lung. The other was dug out of the avalanche with severe frostbite. They're singing like birds to cut a deal. They gave us the buyer. They gave us the middleman in Seattle. We're rolling up the entire network, Elias. By tonight, the U.S. attorney will be announcing the biggest wildlife trafficking indictment in history. Elias looked at the screen, at the frozen image of the ghost, the white cat suspended in that split second of safety before the violence began. It wasn't for nothing, he whispered. No, Sarah said, placing a hand on his good shoulder. It wasn't. You did it, Elias. You saved her. The months that followed were a blur of a different kind of struggle. The trial was a media circus. Elias refused to appear on camera, giving his testimony via a closed deposition from his recovery bed. He became a reluctant folk hero, the guardian of the Rockies, a title he loathed. He didn't want fame. He wanted his leg to work. He wanted his shoulder to stop aching when it rained. He wanted the silence of his cabin. The physical recovery was brutal. The bullet through his shoulder had missed the artery but shattered the scapula and torn through the rotator cuff. The rehab was a daily torture of stretching and tearing scar tissue. His knee, already bad, was now permanently compromised. The doctors told him he would walk with a cane for the rest of his life. They told him his days of high-altitude hunting were over. Elias listened, nodded, and then went home to his cabin and started training. He walked to the mailbox, then to the creek, then to the tree line. He fell often. He cursed the pain, but he kept moving. He was a creature of the wild, and the wild did not tolerate stagnation. Winter melted into a wet, muddy spring. The rivers swelled with runoff, roaring with the voice of the melting snow. The mountains turned from white to a deep, bruising gray, then finally to a vibrant, shocking green. Wildflowers erupted in the meadows. Indian paintbrush, lupin, glacier lilies. The air softened, losing its bite, carrying the scent of damp earth and new life. By June, the snow remained only on the highest peaks, clinging to the north faces like stubborn memories. Elias sat on the porch of his cabin, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the sunrise. His cane, a piece of polished hickory, leaned against his chair. He felt the pull. It was an itch under his skin, a magnetic draw that tugged at his soul. He needed to go back. Not to the ridge, that place was a graveyard of bad memories, but to the valley, to the canyon. He needed to know. The reports said the poaching ring had been dismantled. Vance was dead. His body had been found 3 weeks after the storm, washed up on a gravel bar 10 miles downstream. The others were serving 20-year sentences. But the government reports didn't mention the cat. The biologists hadn't been able to locate her. Some said she had likely fled the range, pushed out by the trauma. Others whispered that she might have died from the stress or the harshness of that winter. Elias packed a light bag, binoculars, water, a sandwich. No rifle. He didn't carry a gun anymore. He found he had lost the taste for it. The weight of the weapon felt too heavy, not in pounds, but in history. He drove his truck as far as the logging road would take him, then parked. The hike in was slow. What used to take him 2 hours now took 4. He stopped often, leaning on his cane, listening to the birds, feeling the sun on his face. He moved differently now, not with the silent, fluid grace of a predator, but with the heavy, deliberate plodding of a survivor. He was no longer part of the landscape's violence. He was part of its endurance. He reached the overlook around noon. It was a lower vantage point across the valley from the waterfall cave, but safe enough for his leg. He sat on a warm, flat rock, the same kind of rock he had watched the cat sit on that fateful morning. He raised his binoculars. The waterfall was roaring now, a cascade of white water plunging into the pool below. The cave mouth was dark and empty. He scanned the scree slopes, the tree line, the shadows of the cliffs. Nothing. just rock and sky and wind. He sat there for an hour. Then too, doubt began to creep in. Maybe she was gone. Maybe she was just a ghost after all. A spirit that had manifested to test him and then vanished back into the ether. Maybe it was better that way. If she was gone, she was safe. He began to pack up, a heavy sadness settling in his chest. It wasn't regret, he would do it all again, but it was a sense of loss. He had shared a moment of absolute intimacy with that creature, a bond forged in the fires of life and death, and he wanted one last look, just to say goodbye. He stood up, wincing as his knee locked. He turned to go. Then a flicker of motion. It wasn't near the cave. It was lower, near the edge of the alpine meadow where the trees gave way to the grass. Elias froze. He slowly raised the glass to his eyes. At first, he saw only the swaying of the tall grass. But then the grass parted. She stepped out. She was breathtaking. Her coat had shed its winter thickness, looking sleeker, more muscular. The brilliant white fur stood out against the green of the meadow like a beacon. She wasn't hiding. She was walking with a confidence that made Elias's throat tighten. She paused, lifting her head to sniff the wind. She looked directly toward his position. Elias held his breath. He knew she couldn't see him from this distance. Not really, but it felt like she was looking right into his soul. She knew, in the way that animals know things we have forgotten how to understand. She knew he was there, and she wasn't alone. From the grass behind her, a small, tumbling shape emerged. Then another. 2 cubs. They weren't white. They were spotted, tawny little balls of fluff, clumsy and playful, wrestling with each other, biting at their mother's tail. They were normal. They were healthy. They were the future. Elias watched, tears streaming down his face, unashamed. He watched as the mother nudged one of the cubs back onto the path. He watched as they moved through the meadow, heading toward the safety of the deep timber. He saw something else then. On the mother's flank, just above her hip, there was a patch of fur that was slightly discolored, a faint gray scar where a bullet fragment or a piece of rock might have grazed her. A battle scar. "You and me both, girl," Elias whispered. "You and me both." The ghost stopped one last time at the edge of the trees. She turned her head, her profile illuminated by the afternoon sun. The exact, cinematic shot the poachers had wanted to kill for. But no camera recorded it. No server stored it. It existed only in this moment, for an audience of one. She flicked her tail, a dismissive gesture to the world of men, and ushered her cubs into the shadows of the forest. They vanished, swallowed by the protection of the wild. Elias lowered the binoculars. He stood there for a long time, listening to the wind in the pines. The pain in his leg was still there. The ache in his shoulder was still there, but the heaviness in his heart was gone. He realized then that the verdict hadn't been delivered in the courtroom. It hadn't been written on legal paper or announced by a judge. The verdict had been delivered here, in the silence of the mountains. The verdict was life. Life, stubborn and beautiful, had won. The evil had been purged, washed away by the storm and the river, leaving only the scars as a reminder of the cost. And that was enough. Elias Thorne picked up his cane. He turned his back on the valley, not with the reluctance of leaving, but with the satisfaction of a job completed. He began the long, slow walk back down the mountain, leaving the ghost to her kingdom. He would never come back here. He didn't need to. He carried the image of those cubs in his heart, a warm ember that would keep out the cold for the rest of his days. As he walked, the sun dipped below the peaks, casting long shadows across the path. But Elias wasn't walking into the dark. He was walking home, and for the first time in a long time, the silence of the woods didn't feel lonely. Felt like peace.